Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
My name is Charlotte, and I would describe my mental health journey as a path of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yonemura. Welcome to another episode that we are really excited to share. As always, great interviewees on this podcast. Always a blast to talk to these folks and share this space among such like-minded peers sharing such unique stories. And this episode is no exception to that. Another great guest who I got familiar with by following along on the Changing Tides Instagram, and she was also a guest workshop speaker at the Social Services Department Together Mental Health Conference, where I was jumping from room to room, taking photos. I was the photographer for the day on that event, and I go into this guest's workshop, and people are moving, they're deeply breathing, their eyes are closed. It was a very interactive workshop, and we get to touch on that today. But, there was a range of speakers at the mental health conference, and I really appreciate this guest's unique perspective and unique practice, because I think in the mental health space for a long time, people have had a very narrow-minded view of what mental health looks like. And I'm so glad that this guest today kind of blows the doors open on what it means to be spiritual, what it means to be mindful, and I'm just so excited for you to hear more from her. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and welcome the guest of this episode. But actually, before I forget, I do need to add a content warning for this episode that we do very briefly discuss eating disorders and drug abuse. So it's very brief in the episode, but I just want to give a heads up because it can definitely be a triggering topic. So be mindful as you go forward and listen to this episode. So now, without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce the guest of this episode, Charlotte Nguyen. Charlotte, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I literally right before I was like, okay, we're gonna start the interview, and I felt like I had to come in with a little bit more calm and to try to match your energy because I love your energy so much. I'm going to try to match it. So, um, but so great to have you on. I saw you do your thing as a presenter at our mental health conference last year, and we've been following along from our Changing Tides accounts on your Instagram, and it's just so cool to finally sit down and have like a long conversation with you. And I want to just start by why you described your mental health journey as 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And first of all, you're so perfect as you are. And you know, I I'm also just like a huge fan of you and this podcast and everyone who's been on it, and just so grateful to be part of the legacy of the amazing, cultural workers and mental health workers and healers that have been part of this community. So just thank you so much. The honor is mine. And, this idea of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows actually comes from a Buddhist text where the Buddha describes, the path of healing and enlightenment as just that, the human experience as one of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And it's something that I try to keep as an anchor, because I think sometimes on my journey, there's a lot of sorrow, and then I forget to tap into the joy. And sometimes when there's joy present, always wanting to keep a pulse on suffering as well, and other people who may not have my privileges or may not just be in a place where they can experience joy. So I think, yeah, that phrase really resonates with me because I'm a survivor of many things. I don't
Mm.
look like what I've been through. From a very young age, I guess you could say I experienced mental health care at a young age. I had lost both my best friend and my first boyfriend to drug abuse in high school and had a mental health counselor on and off throughout my adolescence. And then I had taken a sabbatical um, shortly after that and underwent rehabilitation for an eating disorder that I was suffering from at the time, and of course received mental health counseling and had my first experience with group therapy during that time. And my family, sort of came to the US via the Vietnam War. And in some ways, with that legacy of trauma and oppression, I think I've always had a lot of urgency and commitment around suffering and how to heal suffering in the world, and the question of how that actually comes into practice is obviously complicated and somewhat difficult to achieve, but just continuously still asking how to lead a life of service that can lovingly overturn the status quo,
Mm.
I think, right?
Yeah.
Mm,
So there's something that I latched on to, and
mm.
I was writing notes, so I'm not scrolling TikTok or anything. I'm just writing notes.
I
Um,
would understand. I
yeah.
might scroll through TikTok sometimes listening to myself speak.
Hey,
It's okay.
we could go live on TikTok if you want to. I'm
We
just
definitely can. There's a lot on
yeah,
TikTok
totally.
that we could explore in this episode. So
But one thing that you did say that I wrote down was that you don't look like what you've been through. And I've never heard that, but I think that's so powerful because, you know, there's so much trauma that doesn't come to the surface. And it's all so much of what we go through is internalized. And I just have never heard that phrase before, but I think that's so powerful. And then it's funny, I told you I just recorded a podcast episode earlier today, and we discussed I brought up the book The Alchemist, but then one thing that you mentioned with Buddhism is I also around the same time read Siddhartha, and just like I think there's so much to gain through Buddhist teachings, whether you're a Buddhist or not. Like I don't personally identify as being Buddhist, but like so much of I think, having your own agency and you could build your own path, I think is something that I kind of gained through the book and through Buddhist teachings. So I just I'm kind of tied into my last interview and your intro today. So throwing that all out there. But it sounds like you experienced a lot of mental health at an early age. But when would you say that like your mental health journey began? When were you conscious of what mental health is and that you were, experiencing that?
yeah, well, when I say like I don't look like what I've been through, and I think most of us don't, right? I think so much of my life, especially in my academic and like professional career, was spent like very carefully curating myself and my life and my appearance and how I spoke, just everything about me, so that people wouldn't be able to see the real me, which was, a young woman with mental health issues, with a speech disability, low income, English as a second language, right? Like everything about me was very carefully curated so that people wouldn't see me in those ways. And while in some ways it did give me access to certain spaces, in school, and I was able to get a lot of scholarships all throughout high school and throughout college. And it certainly, allowed me to access certain spaces in my professional career. I think what it ended up doing was also force me to hide like all the parts about me that made me special,
Mm,
right? So as like a little girl, like learning English and just like trying to fit in, um, and like as an adolescent, like it hit all the parts of me that made me special. Like the fact that I could speak all these different languages and was like multilingual and multicultural and like up in Vietnam, like, I knew how to set up an ancestral altar when I was 4 years
Oh,
old.
wow.
I knew the difference, right, between like all these different plants. Like I could tell you the difference between like jasmine and lemongrass, and I can tell you like how you can cook it and just all of these things. Um, I didn't do that well in school, but I was helping, my grandma translate like government documents from English to Vietnamese at a young age, right? Like I didn't do that well in school, but I was like helping caregive for my little brother as
Mm,
like the eldest daughter in my Vietnamese family, right? And so I think, fast forward a little bit into my professional career, like there, I just can't, I just got to a point kind of like around 2017 in my last nonprofit job where I couldn't keep up the act anymore. And there were different ways that my body was communicating to me that, like, being in this environment, trying to keep up this persona, wearing the suits and like being a good girl and just like, presenting myself in a way that I thought would make me successful or accepted or give me access to things. It just my whole body was rejecting it. And every time I tried to like present at a board meeting, I would like vomit or
mm.
something, or like start to break out in hives.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to leave my professional career in human rights. And I couldn't be in the space anymore. And during that time, sort of decided to like get my health back on track,
Hmm.
after a little bit of burnout and just like experiencing all this ungrounding. Who am I? Where am I? And I sort of undertook this journey of wanting to understand how to be free from suffering. And one of the ways into that was through Buddhism and the practice of mindfulness.
Hmm.
And I was introduced to meditation via my parents when I was a child. I became really devoted to the practice in 2017, which is when you could say I had my kind of spiritual awakening or meant really started my healing journey and have held a daily practice of meditation for 12 years.
Wow.
And I just remember like feeling a sense of relief, just being able to sit still for a little while. And I know that's not how everyone's body experiences this. Sometimes it can actually be very scary to just try to sit still. But for me and my body, I experienced this intense joy and just letting my shoulders drop and just be quiet and drop the act
Hmm.
for 45 minutes was a total revelation for me. And I was just always go, 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 and always in my head, really cerebral, trying to like shapeshift myself all the time to what I needed to be in order to survive or keep my scholarship or, keep my job so I could pay the bills. It was like diving underwater for the first time,
Hmm.
just a very different mode of being. And so, yeah, that's how I found the path to mental health, or how I guess the path found me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess like when did you kind of discover, because I think some people can see meditation as a separate practice from maybe mental health. Were you always kind of conscious that like your meditation was a part of improving your mental health? Or did you like when were you conscious of yourself having a mental health journey?
Yeah, I would say when that kind of, when my body was communicating to me in all those different ways that like I just couldn't be doing what I was doing anymore,
Right.
in terms of pretending and like just being someone who I wasn't. And yeah, this question, I think like sometimes I think people like there's like your mental health practice and then your spiritual practice. But I think for me, those two things have always been very intertwined.
Hmm.
Like my pathway into healing anxiety, depression, like from my PTSD, um, spiritual practice and like, traditions rooted in Asian wisdom have always just been my doorway into that, and I think that's really protected me, I think, from a lot of the um, kind of constructs of Western psychology or like Western
Mm,
approaches to mental health that tend to really emphasize like um, analyzing or um, uh, sort of having like an intellectual understanding of what mental health is about, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Right.
totally, totally.
Mhm.
I think you mentioned it earlier that you always
Mhm.
did kind of see it as being intertwined, spirituality and mental health
Mhm.
as being intertwined. And I do, yeah. So it did make sense to me.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
led you to decide like, this is working for me and it's something that I'm passionate about, but when did you seek, wanting to assist others in this journey of
Mhm.
wellness and mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like many of people's callings, it kind of finds you, right? And I, had taken some time from human rights work and activism and kind of being in that space to just get my health back on track. And during that time, I think like 6 months in, I was like, all right, Charlotte, like you ran out of your savings, like you got to figure out what to do, So
Mm,
I figured, okay, what's a way that I can stay healthy while also like going back to work and kind of being of service and yeah, like really re-entering the passion that I had for service and wanting to help others and contribute to social justice. And so what I did was I went into consulting for nonprofits, right? So it's like, okay, I have this journey and this experience that I think a lot of people can relate to of like wanting so much to help other people overcome difficulties and traumas and oppression, but they themselves experiencing trauma and difficulty and oppression and hardship themselves. And like for me, that was sort of how I found my way in back into the work was, okay, let me help people change, people who are working for social change or social justice, just be more emotionally healthy and inspired in their work. And it was during that time that I was doing like wellness workshops and wellness consulting for nonprofits and social change organizations that people would start to kind of open up to me and sort of share with me, after a workshop, like stories about what they've been through and sort of like ask like, hi, do you take one-on-one clients? Like, do you think like we can work one-on-one? And it was the first time in my life, really, that anyone ever told me that I was like smart or that like anything I had to say was meaningful. I was just constantly in spaces as like a scholarship kid and as like the only woman of color in like a professional setting where like people just always treated me like I was incompetent, I wasn't
mm,
smart. And it's true, like I was always kind of like stumbling on my words and I was always just very anxious in those spaces. But when I really got to lead with my story, that was when everything clicked to me of like, oh, maybe I do have intelligence.
mm.
Maybe I do have something to contribute. Maybe I'm not totally useless,
Yeah,
and it's so interesting to me looking back now, and seeing like the different ways that people made me feel that way, that I didn't have any intelligence or anything to contribute or offer. But once I started working, like leading with my story and um working specifically with people who shared my experience as a person of color, as a queer person, as a woman. Um, yeah, I really sort of found my purpose. So, yeah, from there, I sort of moved a little bit like in addition to offering, workshops and teachings for organizations and universities, spaces like that, I opened up a private practice where I got to, yeah, where I get to work with uh, revolutionary change makers, marginalized leaders, and just help them heal from oppression so that they can cultivate a truly liberated life and really be the contribution that they came here to be. So, yeah, that's sort of how I found my way into it.
that's awesome. Are you from Southern California? Well, I mean,
I
yeah,
Yeah, I was raised here. Yeah, I mean,
got it.
yeah, since I was a kid,
And then like
Yeah.
school, did you also do in SoCal?
I did not. I went to school at American University in Washington,
Okay.
D.C. Yeah, my background is in international peace and conflict resolution. And for a while, I thought that was what I was going to do in my life, which is like alleviate wars and conflicts and
Yeah.
maybe, genocides and things like that. And, yeah, that was that was my background until I realized like, oh, bureaucracy, big governments might not be my thing. I
Mm,
think more my gift is in grassroots, very people-centered kind of work. So yeah.
totally. Yeah, because it struck me when you were discussing, like your experience in school and not feeling like welcomed or not feeling intelligent in those spaces. So I was just curious about like where it was because I feel like
Mhm.
I kind of experienced something similar in I'd say it went the other way. I was like more so tokenized when I went to school on occasions when I was in Chicago. It's a
Mm.
very diverse city, but not a huge AAPI population specifically. So like for DC, like I'm guessing it was like not a huge AAPI population then.
There is, but
Uh,
it's like I'll give an example of like my first day as an on the job at like Amnesty International, right?
mm,
Like people like I would, go to the front desk and I was like waiting for like the HR manager to come out and people like assume that I was like the refugee and not
mm,
a person
wow.
who was hired to work there, so I mean there's a big Vietnamese population, I think in Virginia and
Mm,
Maryland. But yeah, it's like either you're like, a refugee from somewhere or you're like international student.
mm,
Yeah, I can totally see why that would be a difficult experience as well. And
yeah.
to be honest, like in those spaces that are highly hierarchical, very like predominantly white, like I think it would be accurate to say that my intelligence doesn't fit. Like I don't really
Mm,
know if I have anything to contribute to those
mm,
spaces, and that's why it didn't work. And it was just really being in those spaces really made me see that, like, what if all the rules that have been given to you were actually incorrect for your life? It's like being allergic to something. It's like if
mm,
you eat a particular food and they're like, oh, it's supposed to be healthy for you, but
right.
you break out in hives every time you eat it. Like, and your nutritionist is like, oh no, this is good for you. And everything you see on TikTok and Instagram
Right.
is telling you, right, this is the healthiest thing to do, but it's not right for you,
Mm,
So it was just this awakening of what if that applies to what if that applies to your life? What if somebody has made a plan for you or give you guidelines that's supposed to be good for you or healthy for you or help you to become successful, but it's not right for you,
right.
So yeah, I think like being able to pay attention to my body, pay attention to my spirit helped me understand that it just wasn't the right space for me, right? That's why I felt stupid all the
Mm,
time because it just wasn't the right space. And it was so hard to focus on actually being when like you're mentally breaking out in hives, right? Every time you try to express yourself. And so, yeah, as soon as I got out, everything clicked. And like,
yeah.
I'm being invited to speak on podcasts and give keynotes. And like, it just all clicked. So,
Hmm.
yeah, just so interesting, right?
So, like you've touched on the different roles that you take, as, this, I would say one woman show of the multiple hats that you wear. So, like, how do you like currently define your occupation and the different services that you do offer?
Yeah. Well, if I could give like the elevator
Please
pitch
do.
version, I would say I'm a Buddhist coach, facilitator, speaker, who's just really passionate about bridging the worlds of love, justice, and healing. And I'm the founder and spiritual director of Get Free, as I mentioned earlier. And I think as a a facilitator, a healing facilitator, I'm just really passionate about empowering marginalized leaders to become more emotionally healthy and inspired through mindfulness practices rooted in Buddhist and other Asian spiritual traditions. I just really believe in applying the wisdom of our spiritual traditions in order to help us heal, deepen compassion, build solidarity, and just really help us meet the suffering of the present moment. Our ancestors have been through so much, and it's likely that they have like a whole body, a whole field of spiritual resources, mental health resources that can really guide us in times like these and give us wisdom.
Mhm.
And it may not be coded in that way, right? I'm sure if we were to look back at their stories of how they overcame occupation and
Yeah,
war and colonization, they wouldn't like call it mental health strategies or emotional resilience or anything like that. But it is wisdom that we can call upon. And so I'm just so passionate about retrieving that, making it applicable to how we approach mental health today and allowing that wisdom to lead. So yeah.
totally. Um,
Mm.
so one of the reasons why I ask is because, you do speak and you do offer wisdom to, other leaders, other people in the field of mental health. And, for some reason, sometimes people ask me to come speak to them. And like I'm like, it's
Go
like
Matthew, of
but like
course.
but like but it's like for me, it's like, sometimes I'm going and I'm speaking to registered, I'm like licensed therapists. And I personally experience like imposter syndrome as someone who's working in mental health, but I'm not licensed as a professional. And I know you have like licensing of different coaching and practices, but like, have you ever experienced any form of imposter syndrome and g- coming into these spaces? And if you do, like, how do you show up and be present and fully offer your help?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. It's so interesting that you ask it because I think I wouldn't say not it's isn't so much imposter syndrome, but actually like I receive skepticism
Mm,
and skepticism from traditional mental health people in spaces all the time of just like, yeah, being invited to mental health spaces and conferences. And it's just so obvious that I'm like the weird spiritual lady, right? And I just have to, right? Like I get that projection all the time that I shouldn't
uh,
be. But like where I come from, it makes so much sense that we're here, right? And yeah, I think like something that I just always try to remind myself is that mental health, spiritual health, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being are not Western inventions. Um, you know, acupuncture, Tai Chi, Ayurveda, mindfulness, meditation, these are traditions that have been part of Asian people and cultures and practices since time immemorial. And I think if you look really closely, and I say this as someone who has been like on and off receiving traditional mental health care and talk therapy since I was like 14 years old, right?
mhm.
I have a whole list of like therapists that I refer people to. Like, I'm such a huge believer. And if you really observe the behaviors and like trends within Western psychology, they're always just kind of like looking at what healers do and then just like copying it like 10, 15, 20 years later. Right. So you'll notice, right, that like 10 years ago, um, mindfulness and yoga were seen as really fringe, right? Like if you told someone that you practice yoga or meditation, they'd be like, oh, you're kind of woo-woo, right? But now all of a sudden, there's all this research about mindfulness and its benefits for our mental health. And like now therapists and mental health practitioners are being trained in it and bringing it
Yeah.
into these sessions, right? I think I just read somewhere that is it Philadelphia or something, like just legalize the use of psychedelics and
Mm,
psilocybin, um, like psychedelic assisted therapy. I mean, it's just, things within that used to be seen as fringe, like inner child healing, that kind of
yeah.
language. These are things that, you know, healers and like have been talking about for decades, right? And then, now it's just becoming a little bit more mainstream. But yeah, I think that kind of helps me a little bit in knowing like, okay, this is just how it works, right?
Hmm.
Like Western psychology is often kind of designed, even if you're a practitioner, and I know I'm in community with many that like really try to decolonize psychology and therapy and traditional mental health care. Um, it's just designed to look at anything spiritual or body-based or somatic as like questionable, right? Or anything feminine or anything, right? Like not scientifically evidence-based, as skeptical. And this is just how it goes. Is like it's designed to look at you with some skepticism. People are going to question you now. Give it 5 to 10 years, and everybody and their mom is going to be kind of
Yeah.
applying it. So I hope that gives you some, warm encouragement. And yeah, like if there are so many incredible decolonized therapists and licensed mental health care providers out there who often speak about how um, kind of like how they had to go through their own journey of releasing like the habit of pathologizing mental health,
Mm.
right? And need to unlearn kind of the ways that Western health system in general looks at any kind of dis-ease or mental illness as something to be fixed, something that's inherently wrong, versus something that we just learn to be with and co-create with, right? And
Mhm.
befriend, um, which I think a lot of Eastern traditions validate and speak to. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
so interesting. I think it's kind of like I think you even see it in Eastern culture outside of mental health, like how I
Yeah.
think Korean culture and food is getting really popular, and like I have a feeling soon, who knows what will be next. I just think like
Yeah.
eventually people are like that food looks icky, that mental health practice or that wellness activity seems icky, but
Mhm.
now who knows when it'll be cool, you know? So I think you make a good
Right.
point there. Yeah.
I know. Now there's like, gentrified Korean place.
Anyone could open a boba shop now. Yeah.
Anyone, I know that comes with its own issues. We call it like mindfulness, like sort of the way that Western culture kind of co-ops these practices, which is a different conversation. Maybe you've heard different podcasts. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's like, hope that gives you warm encouragement that like, you might be judged now, but pretty soon,
totally.
yeah,
And
people
like
will
I
come
know
around.
I think like something when it comes to like in my situation where, I'm a program coordinator, I'm not a licensed therapist, but like the I believe I think it's California. I could totally be off on this, but there's they're seeing peer support, mental health support, like no licensed therapist in the room, but peer support as something that could be covered by insurance in regard to it being like recognized by the state as mental health support. And, I think like it's true, it always has to be like the clinical backed support that is usually recognized, but
Mhm.
we're seeing more and more that other forms of support are being recognized as valuable. And it's taking time.
It's just taking time, absolutely. And I think what you're pointing to, at least how I'm experiencing, is that there are multiple paths to liberation, multiple paths to healing.
Yeah.
Right? And there are, I know, I receive clients all the time who've experienced really traumatizing experiences with their therapist, right? Who
Hmm.
was racist or just like didn't have a trauma-informed approach to things, and
Yeah.
that sought them to seek spiritual support, spiritual mentorship. And I have also experienced healers that were really crappy and just had
Right.
no idea what they were doing because they don't have training to work with trauma, right?
Right.
It's you will find, good practitioners and awful practitioners in
Yeah.
any space, right? So it's just finding what works for you. I have an amazing therapist right now that I'm so grateful for, and I've experienced awful mental health care from clinical spaces as
Yeah.
well. So it's just finding what works for you. Mhm.
Totally.
Mm.
So I did discuss mention this earlier that we were able to have you as a speaker at one of our mental health conference last year for Little Tokyo Service Center. And I think it was so I was the photographer, so I was walking around and trying to
Oh,
get so I wasn't able to yeah.
oh,
So I wasn't able to stay in the
so
room the whole time.
tired.
But I was in there and like, I was in one room where it was, someone from, Western mental health support where it was like very much so a sit down and Q&A. And then I walk into your room where there was incorporating movement and like, like it was eyes were closed, heart, hands over your heart. And like,
Yeah.
I was just like the change in room to room was so interesting. But for you, when you enter a space like that, how do you try to fit wisdom into a 1 hour conversation versus someone that you'll be seeing week after week in like a coaching format? Like how do you try to approach these shorter engagements?
Wow. Well, I thank you for sharing that experience. I remember you.
Yeah.
I was just thinking to myself, I wonder what happened to those photos. But yeah, it's so funny because I love as just like a student as a student, I love sitting in a panel and just receiving information. But as a practitioner, the idea of just talking at people for 30 minutes just gives me so much anxiety.
Hmm.
And I just don't think I could really talk for that long. So, for me, I really try to make workshops interactive and participatory. And a lot of that is just informed by, you know, tool, like my educational background in pedagogy of the oppressed and just like really seeing education as a participatory process, that it's not just like the sage on the stage that has the wisdom and then you kind of impart the wisdom onto the participants. Like they have wisdom. They are the experts of what will help them heal or what might help them feel more liberated, whatever, right? And so
Hmm.
it's my job to open the door to that wisdom. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, the way I approach, okay, I guess if you could put it this way, um, these sort of 1 hour retreats or workshops or kind of temporary experiences are kind of like the workout, right? You go to the gym and you get this like burst of energy or this burst of like strength building. And then when you leave the gym and actually like use that strength, like going to the grocery, carrying the groceries, carrying your kiddo, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
is the everyday work of strength building.
Got
Right?
it.
So yeah, I would say like workshops, retreats, those kind keynotes, those kind of experience. I think was it was it Abbott Elementary, they described it as like the work of a motivational speaker is kind
Uh-huh.
of like a joy firefighter. You just go in and you just spray as much inspiration on everyone as possible.
Uh-huh.
And you leave. But one-on-one work, sort of longer term containers, are where we really build the everyday resilience, right? The everyday skill building of
Hmm.
getting free. And yeah, sometimes I'll go to a talk or something and just get the motivation or the boost I need. But the everyday work is really what happens, in the therapy room or
Hmm.
in a safe container with a trusted practitioner.
Yeah, I first of all love Abbott Elementary. It's like
Love it. Love it. Also, I saw your mug.
oh,
The
this
office is
is
my
yes.
favorite. The best ever.
Gifted to me actually by my supervisee. So I have someone who thinks I'm the best boss, the world's best boss. So I'll take that,
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Oh my God. I would
Of
love to. We need to discuss the office at another time.
course. And also I wrote in my notes that I need to send you the photos from the conference. So I'll find the ones I took of your workshop and I'll send them to you. So I'll make sure you
Oh,
get the
cool.
photos.
Awesome. And anyone
Yes.
listening to this, Changing Tides puts on these amazing mental health, community offerings. And yeah, we like got on our feet. I had them like doing things with their arms and just like breathing in and out. And yeah, we had a great time.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad.
Yeah.
So, one thing, just to switch lanes. and to
Mhm.
incorporate the fact that you wore an outfit themed for this conversation, very Earth-esque, was yes, exactly. For anyone not on
Yeah.
YouTube watching the video, greenery is behind Charlotte, and her dress is very Earth-esque. And yes, and we did discuss this intersectionality of climate concern and mental health, which I think is kind of a new age concept, which like for me, I feel like everyone should kind of have that climate anxiety, but not everyone does. And you know, like we live with this anxiety of climate change on a day in, day out. But what inspired you to like dive into this, to exploring why we have this climate, why we have this intersectionality?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we're creating space for this conversation. I would say over the past few years, I've gotten, especially post-pandemic, really passionate about how can we really resource change makers and
Mm,
really support change maker well-being. And one of the ways that I found myself deepening into that work is I started working with an organization called the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation, where I've just been able to work with a team of monastics and uh, activists and just people who care about people and planet. And um, part of our work is we support the mental well-being of over 2,400 climate leaders and activists in like over 80 countries every year through this program that I support with called Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, which basically is based on the mindfulness teachings that are rooted in Vietnamese Zen Buddhism.
mm,
And uh, in that work, I've just been able to really see the connections and the links between how the climate crisis affects our brains and ultimately our neurological, mental, as well as physical health. And there's a really interesting article that just came out in The Guardian that I really encourage everyone to see, and maybe we can like link it
yeah.
in, YouTube or something. But it basically talks about the growing rates of anxiety, depression, um, ADHD, and how it relates to rising temperatures and other extreme environmental changes. And so there's all sorts of evidence that's coming out around how, like, temperature spikes, for example, are driving surges in domestic violence
Mm,
and online hate speech, and how, like, cognitive experts have been able to like draw these connections between rising CO2 levels and how it impairs our decision making and our problem solving skills and um, are just our executive functioning. And so when it comes to the health effects of climate crisis, I think to your point, there's a growing field of interest that's seeking to connect those dots between the environment and our mental wellness. And I think, you don't need to look at that research to be able to like know that has an impact, right? Any of us, maybe not so much in Southern California, but in parts, when there's extended periods of rain,
yeah.
gloominess, right? We feel that. When there's a really, really hot day, like we feel cranky, right? And I think as well, like this might be in a separate um study, but like that's no coincidence, and I think like Harvard, was it Harvard? Yeah, I think it may have been Harvard that like did the study of how students who lived in dorms without air conditioning performed like way lower than people who
Mm,
did have it. And like, it's and how like, post office workers tend to experience higher percentages of harassment on like hot days, right?
mm.
It affects our cognition, our mood, our executive functioning, and essentially our wellness. And so, yeah, I think, this is an area that we're not necessarily that I'm really interested in supporting more caregivers, therapists, healers, people within the caring profession in being able to um, like raise awareness around that connection, as well as how we can prevent and create protections um, around this issue. So yeah, I think it's you know the ability to kind of create capacity for thinking about the climate crisis. It's hard, right? It's not
Hmm.
really something that many of us want to think about. And just like any crisis, it's always the best approach is always to kind of stay on top of it, right? And I think raising awareness, just having conversations around it, really, I think, help us safeguard, um, yeah, safeguard our mental well-being as we dive into these issues further. Mm.
In regard to, you know, for me, and I think a common sentiment is like, I feel hopeless. Like, what can I do? It's
Mm.
the climate change is so much of a corporate, big business issue where my paper straw, like, it could help, but is that really the solution when, billionaires are getting away with, you know, their contribution to the climate?
Mm.
Like for someone who just tries to put it away, like I'm aware of the situation, but like how much can I really do? Like for someone with that point of view, like how might you try to convince otherwise or try to safeguard from,
Mm.
yeah.
The effects of that, yeah. Well, the good news, there is good news. The good news is that there have been people, scientists, organizers, activists, artists, cultural workers who have been working very diligently and passionately around climate justice for many, many, many decades. And so this is really not a time, like, I don't want anyone listening to this and being like, I need to go become an expert, a climate expert. That is
Mhm.
not the encouragement at all. My encouragement would be number one, find an organization, find a group that is already working on these issues and work, dive into this in community. The worst thing you can do is like start to Google climate and like, I mean, guaranteed you're going to spiral. I do it all
Yeah.
the time. I'm guilty of it. But that's the last thing you want to do, right? Is to try to figure this out on your own, because for sure that will lead to article after one statistic and then the next statistic. And it's just going to be a lot of doom and gloom. I can
Yeah.
guarantee. The best thing you can do is tap into the work that's already being done. If there's a community garden
Mm.
near your house, right? Like start there. If there's an Extinction Rebellion group in your local community, like they do virtual meetings, like join their mailing list, find out where they are, find out what your local group is, join their mailing list, go to their next general meeting, right? There's a wonderful sort of growing community called climate cafes
Mm.
where people meet and just hold space for each other around the grief and anxiety that they feel around the climate, and discuss how they can take action together. So like that would be the first thing, is like you don't need to become a climate expert. You don't need
Right.
to start looking at all these things. Like join a movement,
Right.
join a group of people who already care about people and planet and build together,
Hmm.
right? That would be the first place to start. And then um and to sort of add to that, like folding it into what you already do, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, I think a lot of times when these crises come up, it's like there's this tendency to kind of pivot, or like kind of like I need to drop everything and respond to this crisis. That's never going to work, because we're kind of always in crisis, right?
Right.
It's like
Totally.
there's always something. And so for me, I'm a really big fan in terms of like leadership of folding it into what you're already doing. So if you run a t-shirt company,
Mhm.
or you like run a jewelry company, or you're a filmmaker, like it's not about um like pivoting and then like needing to change your life around it. It's folding it into what you already do, right? So how can you be more ethical as a jewelry company, right? Or fold in climate work into your art. If you are already an activist working within racial justice, for example,
Mhm.
like how can you bring a intersectional environmental lens into what you're already doing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Mm.
that's a great tip. Because like I definitely feel the doom and gloom, but
Mhm.
like yeah, there's little things that when you just incorporate it into your lifestyle, like I think it could go into anything. Like any approach, whether it's your mental health and adding a little bit of something into your routine, or if you're already really into plants, maybe you can grow something that's like actually native to your land and not like I don't know, like there's little things you could do, but I think you put it a lot more eloquently than I am right now.
No, no, but you reminded me as well, and we can maybe add this as another sort of um, option. And this seems obvious, but spend time in nature.
Mhm.
Because if we are going to do this work of saving the planet and species, right, it's going to be really hard to find the motivation and the stamina and the courage to keep going if we're not in relationship, right? It's like we need like what is big enough, right? What is wise enough? What is strong enough to hold all of our suffering, right? And it's the earth,
Mm.
right? It's like, sometimes I think to myself like, oh, where do I put all of this? Like, where do I put all of this suffering? And it's like the earth has that ability to hold that for us, and so it's a win-win for everyone, I think,
Yeah.
right? There's all sorts of evidence that shows how deeply healthy it is for us to
Mhm.
spend time in nature, and also from a purely strategic perspective, right? Being in relationship with the earth reminds us what it is that we're fighting for and what we're working towards, and can give us that strength and courage for the long haul.
Totally.
Mm.
So, something that has struck me with a lot of your work is just that in general, the encouragement and the pride in intersectionality of, spirituality and mental health, or of culture, or of gender. There's this emphasis on intersectionality that I think is a really beautiful part of your practice. And, you've expressed through words and action that there's so much need to show up for community, even if you're not a member or identify as a member of that community you're showing up for. How have like other cultures, communities, spiritualities, or other groups, how have that informed your approach to mindfulness and wellness?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I don't know, Matthew. Were you born in Los Angeles, or
Yeah.
you? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure you can relate to this. Like being in Los Angeles, like my life and how I view spirituality, and like my digestive system from all the food, have really been deeply influenced by like Mexican, Islamic, Jewish, Black, African diasporic, like spiritual traditions. And I'm just so grateful for that. And I think, you know, as an Asian American, I definitely had to go through a phase in my life of like falling in love with being Asian again, right? Like really owning that as a part of my identity, and falling in love with being a woman, and falling in love with being queer, because that was, really conditioned out of me for so long. And I think having been on that journey for many years, I'm kind of in this place, and I don't know if you can relate to this at all, Matthew, or anyone else listening to this, of kind of really understanding that I'm more than that, and
Hmm.
starting to identify a little bit less with race,
Hmm.
and like a little bit less with like gender, and the sort of these like constructs, right? That like, we've been given. And, I know that there's some, not in like a color blindness kind of way, but in a sense of like, yes, of course, I love being Asian American. I love being Vietnamese. And
Hmm.
like, I gain so much when I step out of that space, right? Like there was a time for sure where I needed my therapist, for example, to be Asian American because I wanted to be witnessed and seen in those ways. And I don't know if I need that so much anymore because I just find so much, I gain so much from the wisdom of other cultures and traditions and sort of different ways that people are racialized. And I gain so much from that. And I think there is a little bit of controversy, of course, around, terms like BIPOC or people of color, and that they're so insufficient
Mm.
and, imperfect. And at the same time, I try to remember that terms like BIPOC or people of color are political identities, right? Which is to say that, yes, we're Chinese or we're Thai or we're Mexican or we're Persian. And also by identifying as a person of color, I'm choosing to be in solidarity with other communities, right? Because there's something beautiful that happens when we release the identifications that have been given to us and really rest in something much older and deeper and wiser, which is our humanity, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just sort of where I'm at in my journey of understanding solidarity in a spiritual sense, right? That yes, solidarity is so with other communities is so important politically and in like helping us reach gains for a better quality of life and justice for all beings. And also it gives us so much more spiritual depth
Yeah. No, I
as
think
a
it makes a lot of sense
Mhm.
because like you don't have to be limited to, I don't know, being a Vietnamese spiritual leader. You could just be a spiritual leader, and then you could pull from other cultures and how you're informed because you're not limiting yourself to just how you might be labeled by someone else. So I think it totally makes sense. And
Right,
I
yeah.
think the other side of this is also, you know, being more aware of the world outside of where you're located and where you identify as. And, another thing that I've resonated with is this idea of uncertainty of the future in so many different ways. We've been discussing climate, and then something else that I've seen is like your thoughts on like the genocide in Gaza and this year's election and our own lives that of the stuff that is happening to us directly throughout
Mm.
your own situation and throughout what's going on externally outside of what's right in front of us. How do you center yourself in your needs and then the needs of the people you work with?
Hmm. Ooh, yeah. Thank you for this question. I think I really need it as
Mm.
well, because it invites me into a remembrance of what is actually my deeper purpose here, right? Beyond the roles and the titles, activist, practitioner, facilitator, like what actually is my deeper purpose here? And when I relax into that question, I really feel like my job actually is to do the best that I can to hold the frequency of love and freedom,
Mm.
no matter what is going on. Right. And I'm reminded that Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, he talks about in his book, like when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats were met with like storms and pirates and all sorts of challenges and difficulties, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. Right. But if even one person on the boat remained calm and centered, it was enough to get everyone through and really showed the way for everyone to survive their their conditions essentially, right? And so yeah, I think for me what that experience actually reminds me of and helps me turn my attention to is the fact that my greatest gift to my community and the people that I serve right now is the quality of my inner world, right? It has nothing to do with what I'm producing, the titles, it has nothing to do with what I'm actually doing. It's who I'm being. And that my greatest responsibility right now is to do whatever I can, whatever I need to do to stay fresh and stolid and stay um, rooted and centered so that I
Yeah.
can really be faithful to those in need and consistent, right? And sometimes that looks like resting, sometimes it looks like crying, sometimes that looks like um, taking a break from the screens and the phone. Sometimes that looks like staying connected with the people I love. But all the time, like I'm trying to remember, like drink as you pour,
Yeah.
drink,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Mm.
I Yeah, everything you say has such a poetic flow to it. So
Oh,
I'm trying to, but sometimes I'm trying to think of a response. I'm like, how do I keep up? But
oh,
uh
Matthew, it's just, I mean, that itself, what you just said, like, I feel my whole body kind of soften hearing you say that. Because I don't always see it that way,
mm,
because of my own humanness and conditioning. So you just being you is like so perfect.
thank
And,
you.
and exactly what I need,
Great.
actually, and I'm sure our listeners too. Mm.
Um, I think part of, what I'm touching on about the way you present yourself and the way you show up for others is why, you are a leader to people. But do you think there was a turning point where you went from, yeah, I could maybe lend some words of wisdom to people and, I am being invited to spaces to talk, but was there a moment where you said, like I am a leader of sorts. I am someone who could be a role model to some. Like, is there a turning point where you were like, oh, I'm more valuable than I realized to the this community or to the
Mm.
world?
Wow. I mean, I think anytime, and people might have a hard time believing this, but it's the truth. Anytime I'm ever invited to anything, whether it's a podcast or like a talk or a workshop or anything, the first thought is just like, why?
Mm,
Because it just blows my mind, that like there are women in my lineage who like never received an education, or who never made it past like the fourth grade or something, right? So to be invited as like a young queer Vietnamese woman to share ideas and teachings and to be sometimes even paid for it, to me just completely blows my mind. So the first feeling is just like, what the fuck, why? And then the second feeling, once I kind of breathe, is like, oh wow, like like I'm so humbled in the face of the opportunities that I'm given. Like, how can I not step up? How
mm,
can I not use my platform and my voice? Like, I'm so grateful and so privileged considering like my background and where my community is from. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And, when I think about the most powerful example of when someone saw me, that created a turning point for me, I think it was recently. I was invited to deliver like an opening keynote at the UCSB Social Justice Conference. And I mean, it's a very well respected conference within the University of California system, and like the students and like the activism community there is very like they know what's up, they know
uh-huh.
what's going on, and they have the resources to invite and the budget to invite anyone. But when one of the organizers got on a Zoom call with me and invited me, one of the event coordinators, that they let me know that they had been following my work for a while and were just touched by my approach. And I didn't have to come back to them with a proposal or like a pitch. Like they were just like, we you're it. Like we'd like you to come and speak.
It's
And
you for you. It
yeah,
wasn't,
it's just,
yeah.
yeah, it was me for me. And it was the first time. And as long as I can remember that I could just let my guard down and be seen. I didn't feel the pressure to perform or over explain my work or my experience or my worthiness, something which I've done for years, and could just let the work that I've poured into the field speak for itself. And it was just sort of magic,
Yeah.
I think, to be able to take that pressure off of myself as a woman of color in this work. And I was in tears by the end. Like they were in tears, and just the excitement they felt was so genuine and affirming, and was a little bizarre for me to
Mm,
experience at first. But once I like once again breathed, that nervousness, that feeling of like, oh my God, I have to prove myself. I realized it's just excitement.
yeah,
It's just excitement to finally get to like show people what I can do and what I can contribute, and how deeply I just long to serve, and all the barriers to that were removed, I think, in that
yeah.
moment. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
Shout out to UCSB Multicultural Center. They're awesome.
that's great. We're winding down.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we've been able to talk. I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to say. I have some like silly questions to end things, but is there anything you'd like to say before we get to like the quick fire fun questions I have for you?
Ooh, well, I guess I would love to be in a community with each and every one of you listening here. Like, if you've made it this far, my mind is blown, and I just would love to be able to pour back into you. Just know that even if I don't know you, or like even know that you're listening, it really, like in some alternative plane, is like healing a part of me, a part of my younger self that never thought she had anything to contribute. And just, I would love to be in community with you. You can find me on Instagram at Lotus in a Sea of Fire, and on my website, um, getfreewithcharlotte.com, I think. And yeah, I write, I share, I teach, I lead, I coach, and would just love to have you as part of my greater community and support you all as you become the most liberated version of you, which I hope is radical and fierce and wild and sexy and messy and weird, and everything that the world needs right now. So yeah.
Great. And we'll make sure to link everything in the episode description. So everywhere to find Charlotte will be in the description of this episode. Okay. So I have some quick fun ones, and you led me to one of them, which is what inspired your Instagram name?
Yes, I love telling this story. So, if folks who aren't familiar, Vietnamese Zen master and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh, he was nominated by Dr. Martin Luther King for the Nobel Peace Prize, and is just really such a central figure in like really honoring the intersections of spiritual and political, and how we can use our spiritual practice to fuel our social justice work. And his memoir was called Lotus in a Sea of Fire. And this memoir, it was like banned in Vietnam because, it was talking about peace and all these things. It was just it's a beautiful memoir. It's a beautiful text. And in it, it essentially talks about how the Vietnamese people, Buddhist people, were the lotuses in this sea of fire, of war and destruction, and how they would use their meditation practice, their mindfulness practice, to like they would essentially like do walking meditation and do sitting meditation, and then immediately after go rebuild villages and tend to the dying and the wounded. And they would go back and then, you know, practice mindfulness and then go back into the community. And so it's essentially a metaphor for how our spiritual practice is like the lotus in a world that's on fire,
Hmm.
and how also like our people were the lotuses in a sea of fire that constantly wanted us to fight amongst each other and kill each other, to for many many different reasons. But yeah, that's the origin of
That's
Lotus in Sea
amazing.
of Fire.
I'm glad to hear the origin story of that. I wasn't aware of the memoir. That's amazing.
Yeah, I love to talk about. I know it wasn't a rapid fire response, but
No, no, no. It's
hopefully,
okay.
it was interesting enough.
I need to rename this. It's not really a quick fire, especially the next one. If you haven't thought about this one takes people some time. So if you could invite three people to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
Oh my God.
Yeah, this one takes people some time. I should let people know in advance from now on.
No, no, it's good because it just, these are one of those questions you could overthink. I'm just gonna like trust what comes up first.
Okay.
Um, I would say number one, Ted Lasso. Like I'm just such a like, for anyone who like doesn't know this show, like Why? Like, do you not like joy? Like, please, if you just need like a boost in
So
your life,
good.
um, please watch this show. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
And just will give you a good laugh and a good lift. So number one, Ted Lasso, Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec, because she's just such a badass and it's just totally irrepressible. Doesn't matter. I mean, to work in government, local government bureaucracy is just like, but she's constantly full of energy and always wanting to serve and always wanting to do more for people. And I want that energy and I want to
Uh,
find out where she gets it. So yeah, Leslie Knope. And then I think I would invite Michael Scott because I just want his level of like not giving a fuck. I mean,
uh-huh.
just really doesn't he's probably an Aries. Like, I don't know. Like he just really doesn't care about being respectable or like how he's perceived. He just like talks shit and just is so authentically himself and like is so problematic, obviously. But I don't want to channel the problematic parts. I want to channel just the like
Being totally yourself.
totally yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think between those three fictional characters, I think I would have a good laugh because
Yeah.
yeah. I feel like I don't know. I wish I could give like a more philosophical response, like James Baldwin or oh
No.
my Lord, but like I need a good laugh right now.
Yeah.
So-
That's so funny. Our last guest, who I just spoke to a couple hours ago, said James Baldwin. That's so funny that you throw that name in. Yeah.
I love that. I would love a one-on-one convo with James. But I also feel like James Baldwin deserves rest, and I don't want to disturb him from the ancestral realm
Yeah.
because
That's
he's
fair.
given us so much. But yeah, if he offered, I'd be like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go to Boba.
Right. Right. Um, I loved all of those shows, but is there a show you're currently binging?
There is a show called Vita
Okay.
on Hulu, and it follows the stories of two sisters from East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights. And first of all, it's like really steamy. So just be aware of that. It's like every other scene is like a steamy little scene. But also, it really covers a lot of political themes around gentrification and how they, in their unique positions, one of the sisters is like kind of she's in corporate and like she's trying to approach gentrification in one way and like the other people in the community are trying to approach it another way. And yeah, it's just great storytelling.
Mm.
And this is it. I think that's why representation is so important because you just get into the granular everyday experiences of people versus being perceived by, you know, a white narrative or something. And it's just
Yeah.
so much more rich, and
Very cool.
nuanced.
Very
Yeah.
cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, yeah.
Lastly, after a very long day, what's your preferred way to decompress and root yourself again?
Well, first thing I do is I like shut off the computer, put down the phone, and I just like rub my heart. And that just really helps me drop out of my thinking mind into my feeling body. And I think it literally helps me get back in touch with my heart so that if I'm about to see a beloved, see a friend, or go on a date or something, I'm not carrying the emails and
Yeah.
right, like all of that stuff, the meetings into that space. It's time to take off the leader, take off the speaker, take off the facilitator, take off the mental health,
Yeah, yeah.
really just like remember that I'm just a woman and I'm a lover and I'm a friend, and I'm a human. And yeah, so I just like rub my heart for a bit. And then if I can, I take a bath and I take a bath without music, without TV, without like a bubble bath. It's just warm water, no technology, anything. And I just lay there for an
Mm.
hour. And it's just basically a way to, um, I'm a fire sign. Like I love to just like, I have all this passion and I love to do things. And I have all this ambition and I just want to do as much as possible in this with this life that I'm given. But I really need that space to
Yeah.
just put out the fire just for a moment so I can rest and sleep and
Yeah.
be a lover and be, all of those things
That's
and
great.
truly rest.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. That is all I have for you. We will make sure to add all your info in the description of the episode. But really, I just appreciate you for taking the time. I hope we find each other in another space around our work soon. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Oh my gosh, Matthew, thank you so much. I'm just such a big fan, and the ways that you give space for people to share their stories and be witnessed. I mean, like, I really feel the ways that that reaches out and touches all and ripples out and touches all. And just please know what an incredible contribution you are and this space is to to liberation work and healing work and mental health. And really, like, thank you for
Thank
thank you.
you. I need to cut all that out. That can't be in the episode. All
Of
those nice
course
words.
it
I'm
has
just
to.
kidding. Thank you.
Oh God.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, it'll just be for you. Okay,
Okay.
I'll do a separate ending. Okay. There we go.
I'm kidding. It's
Oh. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much, Michael, and thank you everyone for sorry, Matthew. Oh my
It's
God.
okay.
Sure, thank you so much, Matthew, for having me, and thank you everyone for listening. And be well.
Thank you again to Charlotte for joining the podcast to discuss her mindfulness practice, her previous work in nonprofit, how she shows up in space, and I was just so calm and at peace during this discussion. And I hope, I hope I didn't disturb the peacefulness that Charlotte brings to this episode with my voice. But I think Charlotte just was such an amazing guest, and I look forward to hopefully more collaborations with Charlotte in the future. So if you enjoyed this episode with Charlotte, you can subscribe to our show for episodes releasing every other Tuesday and give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support the podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out the website thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tide on mental health.
Yeah.